So what a great panel that was before us, certainly talking about initial organizational capacity. And this is which is a great segue into our panel, which is about maintaining momentum from planning to implementation. So how do you go from making a plan for restoring a community to actually implementing it? And I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and our organization. I'm Karen Speakman. I'm the Deputy Director of NCALL. We're here in Dover. And we are proud to be the lead agency for Restoring Central Dover. And that's been a wonderful collaborative of a number of organizations from downtown Dover. And we have a plan, and we are in the process of implementing it. We just are almost finishing our first year, so we're really excited about this. And it's only 1 block away from here. You can see some changes that have made. Earlier was mentioned about Central Delaware Habitat building houses, and when you leave, if you find South Kirkwood, you come out of the parking lot, you make a brief left and then a right. You will come on to South Kirkwood Street, and within that block, before you hit Division Street, are 5 houses that are newly built. Some of them are still in construction. But we're excited because NCALL and Milford Housing Development Corporation will be following suit, and we'll be building some more houses in downtown Dover on some vacant lots. And residents are really becoming engaged in our efforts. They've been, from the very beginning, on the steering committee. And we've had a great community fair just last Saturday, a week ago, where we had over 500 residents show up and attend, and we had vendors and lots of activities and just a real good community atmosphere and event. Neighborhood watches have started, and I think you'll hear from our panel here. Community development is a holistic approach. It really involves not just bricks and mortar, but people engagement, making a difference. And we want to have Dover be a better place to live, work, and play. And I think that's probably true of most of our communities. So I will turn it over now to Pilar, who's going to share a little bit. I have each of them introduce themselves, and they will share a little bit about their.
Thank you, Karen. See if I can do this. Yay, it worked. Thank you for having me. I know I see a lot of people actually in the room that I recognize. I was here, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. But really found it engaging to be able to sit down with you for just a few minutes. It was within the context of the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation. And I heard Bridget and Paul talk about them this morning. I'm Pilar Hogan-Klosky with St. Joe's Carpenter Society in East Camden. So I'm just down the street from Bridget. There she is. And we actually work very closely together. In fact, we had the wonderful thing to be able to talk to Bridget while she was on the phone at the White House. Poor thing, I kept saying, get off the phone with us, go enjoy the White House. But we work rather closely together. We have a number of CDCs in the city of Camden. The city of Camden is a city of great need. And I think, let's see if I think this is sort of a picture of what a lot of people have in their minds of Camden. And Bridget and I are very engaged in trying to change your minds and your perceptions of what it is that you think of when someone says the city of Camden to you. And so some of these pictures are just some of the work that we've done in East Camden as well as in other parts of the city to really make a difference. And the Carpenter Society is about 30 years old. We were started in 1985. And we really kept on the blinders. This morning when you were talking about organizational capacity, one of the things that we found was very helpful to us was as we were in our beginning stages, we really kept those blinders on. And while we had a community of great, great need, we found one thing that we found out that we could actually start to make a change on, and that was housing. We sort of kept those blinders on as people came, and we really wanted to engage in all these other things because you want to be able to do things. You have to wait until you get some of that capacity going in one place before you can begin to sort of reach out to everything else. East Camden is just one portion of Camden. It is about 1/3 of the population and about 1/4 of the land mass. Camden has some very dire statistics, probably not so different from some of the communities within your working. But one of the things that stands out for us is that Camden has an extremely high housing vacancy rate. This shows 13.7. Depending on who's doing the counting, it can range anywhere all the way up to maybe 18 or 20%. And the other thing that stands out for East Camden, at least to me, is we are really a community of growing recent immigrants, and that's beginning to change how we're sort of looking at our community. Just a little background on the Carpenter Society. So we're 30 years old. We've created 960 homes for people. 313 of those are rental. The remaining 900 and almost 60 or something, 600 and maybe 30 are home ownership. We've really tried to change that home ownership structure in the city so that we can improve that sort of home ownership rate. And every summer, we look at who has been able to stay in their homes and kept their homes. We're really happy to say that we have about 84% of our homeowners who have ever purchased the house from us or their family. So we counted if someone's staying in the house, or someone has passed away and passed it on to their family as remaining in the house, and a 4% foreclosure rate. 2 of our neighborhoods are down to a 3% housing vacancy rate. So if that gets compared to the 13%, we're actually starting to see some visible impact of some of the work that we're doing. One of the things that we do while we're doing the development side of it is we also work with our homeowners. So we have a very active housing counseling agency. We are a HUD counseling agency, and require that people come for housing counseling as well as group classes, so that they sort of understand that they're not the only person who's willing to invest in these homes by themselves. There's this group of other people that are sort of jumping into the fray with them. And then the third part that we actually work on is community engagement, going out, doing some organizing, being substantially involved in what that planning is going to be for that neighborhood, getting the community interacting in everything that we're doing. And so that has really started to have us be able to pull off those blinders that I've talked about. And now we're sort of fully involved in sort of large-scale community revitalization efforts within all of East Camden and sort of seeping out into other areas. At the center of our neighborhood, just to give you a little bit of background before we jumped into this new planning stage, we did this about 18 years ago, right, 1998, 1999, right before 2000. Right at the center of our neighborhood, we had a large-scale public housing development that just had a series of buildings, and when the buildings sort of were not being maintained, they just moved people out. So the large buildings just sat there and became vacant. It was 25 acres smack in the middle of our neighborhood. We were able to get Hope 6 money and working with the Housing Authority. And that began for us to be able to really start to see the change. So while we'd been out on scattered sites and redoing the rehabs of different houses, this was a huge 25 acres smack in the center of our neighborhood. We had significant partners. This was not something that we did alone with the Housing Authority and the city and the state. And we also had a private developer who worked with us also on this so that we could really start to change. And the thing that the community visioned for this was that it would not be, you're required, you're bound to do sort of one-for-one replacement type things. We did not want it to be one-for-one replacement of the same type of housing. So we were able to look at the much larger neighborhood and be able to pull in so that we were developing not only this 25-acre site, but the entire part of East Camden. So we ended up being able to build both rental units and home ownership, and they were integrated together. We had 14 styles of homes so that you don't have that cookie cutter feel of going into one of those developments where you're like, am I in the brown one or the blue one? Am I the 5th door from the left or the 4th door? These actually began to look, they were all taken from a charrette where we went out into the neighborhood and asked people what they liked about their homes. We have a lot of row homes in East Camden, and that was the first thing that people said was, I'm tired of tracking my trash through the front door, out to the back and be able to take it back through that way. So all of these homes at the most were 2 houses together, sort of as a twin is what I would call it, but 2 houses next to each other, and otherwise single-family home. So we were starting to listen to what people were asking for. Next door, we were able to work with the county to develop a park. The school construction came in and built a brand new school, which was actually what they called a community school, so that it would be a Boys and Girls Club attached to a school, and we could have 24-hour use of the building. The Boys and Girls Club has a pool, which a typical elementary school would not have a pool. The school had a library, and the typical Boys and Girls Club would not have a full-scale library, and that way we have double use of this building that was being built. And we also got a new transit station right in our neighborhood, which links Camden up to Trenton. And so as we started to look at some of these things, we started to realize that the neighborhood was really starting to change. And so what we had looked at back in 2000 was no longer where we were today, and this was 4 years ago. So as we continued to sort of look around, we wanted to make sure that we got as many partners as possible. I would say one of the things that we've really learned as a lesson learned was to involve as many partners as you can sort of handle. I mean, there's always that issue of having too many people at the table. But then also to make sure that you vet those partners, because as you start to get involved in things, you're going to have to hold each other accountable. And if you have a really good relationship, that's something that you can sort of share working with that relationship, as long as you've taken the time to sort of invest in that. So what we did was we applied to the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation. But at the same time, for their planning grant, but at the same time, we also found out about another opportunity to create a marketing plan for East Camden. And we were actually able to do the two at the same time so that we could engage people. The marketing plan is just meant as sort of a branding effort to be able to have you look at the neighborhood in a different way. And it was fun to be able to do both things at the same time and talk to people not only on what's the reality of what we have here, but also what's the perception, and how can we bring those two things closer together and make them both positive. East Camden is a very large area. It's four census tracts. The City of Camden likes to look at things in census tracts. Neighborhoods don't necessarily sort of go together with that. I understand why it's easier to do things by census tract, 'cause it's a lot easier to get those numbers when you're looking for things. So for us, we asked the city for special permission to be able to look at all four census tracts at the same time, because our neighborhood really sort of was starting to sort of meld out over those different census tract lines. We spent time doing as many surveys as you could possibly think to get as much background as we could. Property surveys, we looked at every single property. Resident surveys, we had a consultant who helped us. I think we had visited 427 households. We had a 30-minute interactive survey that we did with them. And then because we have a commercial core that we wanted to work on, we also did a separate retail survey where we went in and actually spoke to the different retail agencies that were there. Come back, as you always do all sorts of mapping. Woohoo, here's what we find out. We looked at not only the land use, but then what we were more interested in was there clustering of excellent, fair, poor houses that we could sort of start to address in a different way. And then because we were interested in the commercial corridor, we looked at where different things were located. As part of the surveys, we found out a lot of information, and I have to say, I know Bridget talked about some of the success measure stuff that she's done, but the success measures is a very involved, statistically correct way of looking at what you have in your survey. And it's really, really time intensive. And I went in kicking and screaming and ended up finding out some really, really interesting stuff about our neighborhood. And you get to design it so that it gives you different ideas in terms of, why were people moving here? 50% said they wanted to live near family and friends. Overall, are you happy living where you're living? 75% said that they were somewhere in that satisfied range. What are the best things? What are the worst things? I mean, these are all sort of things that we're constantly talking about. But it was really interesting to have it actually written down and you could actually track it. There were two things that we really wanted to do when we were looking at our planning and visioning, and that was that we wanted to make sure that we involved specific types of residents. And so we wanted to make sure we were doing youth, and we wanted to make sure that we were including recent immigrants. And so we tried to be very, very inclusive in different ways. Maybe those people wouldn't be the ones that would come out to open houses. And so we designed all sorts of different ways to be able to attract those. I think that's really important, that you know ahead of time who it is that you want to hear from in your neighborhood, so that you can design ways to be able to pull out that specific population. So what we did was we created this plan. Hopefully it reflected, we had over 700 residents at different times come out for different things. We were able to create sort of goals And as we go through everything, what we try to do is make sure that we're always touching one of those goals. And we want to always touch all 4 of those goals so that we're not too far only into neighborhood development or too far only into the arts, so that we're using a little bit of each. And we also identified 4 new areas that we hadn't been working in at all before. And we knew that those were areas that we were going to either have to have really significant partners or sort of tread very slowly so that we knew what we were doing as we were getting into those areas. And the first thing that we did was try to do something really visible. So Bridget mentioned something about sort of the low-hanging fruit. The first thing that we did was we just went out, we wanted to cover graffiti, but it was a community event and we got everyone there. It was something very, very visible to the community. This amphitheater is in the center. It's a park right across the street from the development of Baldwin's Run. And by asking a whole bunch of kids to come out and work with us in painting it, it was their design, it was their work, and it hasn't actually been graffitied since there. And that really made a difference, and I think it was sort of that first visible sign of going from planning to implementation that showed people that we were actually going to start to get something done. So I just want to sort of roll through some of the stuff that we're doing that came out of the plan, and I tried to organize it because you're always going to have sort of the long-term versus the short-term. And I think it's important, you always have to be working on those long-term ones because they're the most exciting and they're the most visionary, but it's also the stuff that's going to take a really long time. And you can't lose people while you're waiting to get the funding to build a house or whatever it is that you want to do. So a few things that we could do right off the bat was we engaged with one of our partners to do the Camden Special Services District, and they come and they clean up our commercial corridor. It's simply sort of an ambassador. It's two people who they're actually both Camden residents in bright yellow who act as ambassadors for the city. They can refer you to services. They know as much as we sort of train them on what we have going on in the city. But they're also there picking up trash, and it has made a hugely visible, not only for the residents, but also for those commercial store owners, because that is one of the difficult things of sort of getting the retail involved. We also worked as an entire city, so Bridget was one of the things. There were maybe 4 or 5 agencies together, and we came together. There's a group out of Chicago called the Neighborhood Foundation, and they do decorative board ups. And so we took our logo that came out of the marketing campaign. This is a porta potty factory. It's incredibly contaminated. I don't know that we'll ever get Superfund in there to clean it up. So in the meantime, we painted it so that at least it looks a little better, because no one wants to touch it because you never know what's in there or not in there. We had a partner who was working on a community building. That's one of the things that always comes up. And so we were able to work with them to sort of launch that. Not only would it be open to just their programs and services, but to the entire community. Again, something very easy. It was already in construction. It was already getting ready to go. But it was something that we could draw people into. Job training was something also that came up. So now this has allowed us, because we've done 2 or 3 things already, this has allowed us to put some time into creating a training program. And so that has been launched. And then just sort of promoting the use of parks. I know Bridget also mentioned we have a lot of things in common. But bringing people outside, and that was one of the huge things. And so bringing people outside, getting them to do some work. Karen just mentioned doing a community thing here. We did a community one last year. It was our first time. This year we stepped it up with some, let's see where it is. We had over 800 people come, so in our second year, which was just wonderful. But so being able to spend some time not only on the short term but the long term. So at the same time as we're doing some of these things, we're also then trying to acquire abandoned houses and trying to rehabilitate some of those buildings and build something new on those lots. But this allows us to do something that's completely visible to everyone today, and it's not those hard bricks and mortar things, but it is things that can happen relatively in short time. So that then, as we go forward and we have a new transit center sometime coming up, we'll be able to sort of build up and keep people involved, because if we all sit around and wait for the train station to be built, we're going to get very old very quickly. So I think in the end, what we're trying to do is change your mind so that instead of having that picture of that vacant house in your mind as what's going on in East Camden, it's people coming out and actually using an amphitheater that the kids have reclaimed as their own, and some kids out actually doing some bicycling and enjoying the day. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rich Kistner. I'm the Director of Columbia County Housing and Redevelopment Authorities in Northeast Pennsylvania. We're about 80 miles north of Harrisburg and about 80 miles north or west of the Poconos. And somehow, I'll let you do that. Came in this morning from Hershey. I'm actually at another conference, and I came earlier than I planned because I looked last night and saw your governor was going to be speaking, and I haven't heard a governor speak before, so I thought I would come. And I want to tell you, he's a great guy. He's only got one more year. Hopefully you guys send him up to Pennsylvania when he's done here. But anyway, I'll get started, figure this out. Arrow? There we go. Okay. Columbia County it's a pretty rural county. Unlike the other presenters you've heard so far, we're very rural. Our whole county is about 65,000 people. Thanks. Berwick Borough is our largest borough, a little over 10,000 people. And the neighborhood that we're working in is much smaller than anything you've heard about 728 people. We have one corridor right through the middle of the county that follows Interstate 80 where we have development. The north and south part of the county, we probably have more deer and bear than people in most of the areas. So this was, again, quite unlike what you've heard earlier. In 2005, we got started. We were introduced to the Blueprint Communities Initiative through FHLB out of Pittsburgh, and we were one of the original 21 communities in Pennsylvania that were selected. And we decided to pursue that because we had a neighborhood called our LaSalle Street neighborhood in Berwick, which was by far the worst neighborhood. Whenever you picked up the paper and saw there was some kind of crime, you immediately took your mind to LaSalle Street neighborhood. And none of us really had any idea how we were going to fix it. So this Blueprint Initiative training was a really good start. I wasn't real optimistic. You know, it took a lot of years for this neighborhood to go south, and really had no expectations that they were going to be able to teach us what to do. But actually, Dave over here, we spent some time with him, which was somewhat entertaining for several weeks, and we really did come away with a lot of knowledge that we didn't have going in. One of the things that we also learned was that there were other partners out there. One of which being the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, as you heard earlier today. We applied to them and we received a planning grant. So with that grant, we hired a consultant and we did our plan. And this is, you can see our slide here, the blueprint for revitalization. These were the strategies that came out of that plan. And one thing I want to note is I mentioned earlier we were awarded the blueprint designation in 2005. And it was 2008 until the plan came out. And one of the things that we did not do well at all was keep folks engaged during that time frame. Matter of fact, when the plan came out, people even forgot that we had a blueprint initiative. They remembered we put a big banner up across LaSalle Street and had the fire company there and the press enterprise was there to take pictures, and 3 years later we came out with a plan and folks couldn't even remember the banner part. So one of the things that we did very poorly was keep the community engaged, that there really was something happening behind the scenes. You know, the Blueprint Initiative took about a year, pretty much, by the time we applied and we went through all the trainings. Then we had to make the application to Wells Fargo to get the funding. That took a while. Then we had to wait for their review. And then once we were awarded, we had to hire a consultant and wait for the consultant to do their work. So it was 3 years that really we didn't do anything. And in hindsight, that was not a very good approach. But finally, after completing the plan, we applied to Wells Fargo Foundation again for an implementation grant. And it was a small grant of $271,000 compared to what they might fund for larger communities. But what it did is it allowed us to hire a neighborhood manager. So now we had some capacity that we could do some work in the neighborhood. And although I have a staff of about 15 folks for our housing and redevelopment authorities, it was really only one person and myself who is doing the work in the LaSalle Street neighborhood. So unlike, again, the previous nonprofits that you heard about with a lot of paid staff, we really only had like 1.5 people, if that, working on this particular initiative. Again, here you can see some of the funders initially that came to the plate for our first project. Our revitalization plan identified 4 different strategies that we wanted to focus on. One was crime prevention. The next was beautification. We had certain areas that we needed to redevelop that had a lot of blighted properties. And the last was homeowner rehab. We learned from the success measures survey that we did that there were a lot of elderly homeowners in the neighborhood that were unable to maintain their homes properly. So we decided that if we wanted to preserve those homes, we should look at rehabbing them. So we applied to Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh for an AHP grant. We had some local foundations, so we kicked in some of our own money, and we ended up with a $650,000 project to help. We helped 31 homeowners within the neighborhood, primarily elderly folks, improve their homes. We did energy audits. And we did siding, we put in roofs, we put in furnaces, mechanical systems, that kind of thing. So that was our first project where we really went in and had some kind of impact in the neighborhood. And that finally put us on the radar screen. We finally were able to do some things, and people recognized that, wow, we really are there, and we're doing some things that previously they thought it was just another book on the shelf. So again, the one thing we didn't do well was keep people engaged throughout that early part of the process. The other thing we did is we created a neighborhood council. And again, this was, we heard earlier about a lot of the grassroots efforts, and this was critical. Being a county agency and not necessarily having roots within that neighborhood, we couldn't be perceived as the ones that were driving the bus. We had to really make sure that we stepped back and we engaged the community and we let them tell us where we wanted to go. We ended up driving the bus, but they were the ones that gave us the direction. And that was critical. You really need to make sure that it's a grassroots effort, that the ideas come from the neighborhood. You might be able to help direct them in some way where you think that they need to go, but you really need to have them formulate the plans going forward. So we ended up with 25 neighborhood residents, and which was significant for a small neighborhood like this. We engaged them. We started putting out the bulletin, a quarterly newsletter, again, to try and keep momentum. We started to do little things because we had a neighborhood manager now. We were able to get out and just talk to folks, have a presence, as we hand-delivered the newsletters rather than mail them. So he could knock on a door, sit on someone's porch for a little bit, and try and establish relationships. We started having little things like Halloween parties, block parties, Christmas parties, just little things that didn't cost much, didn't take a whole lot of effort, but kept people engaged. That was really important to try and get back that momentum that we lost earlier by not engaging folks. We looked at beautification, and again, some really simple things. We engaged local universities to help their students to do surveys to find out what folks would like to see, in particular with a park that was in the middle of the neighborhood. That park was a beautiful park, but it was taken over by drug deals. Folks were uncomfortable going there in the evening. So we asked folks what they'd like to see, and we came up with a plan and a strategy based on their needs and their wants, and we convinced the local municipality to purchase equipment. The Public Works Department did the early foundation work, and then all of our volunteers came out and assembled the play equipment. I think it was $40,000 or $45,000 was committed by the borough. What happened as a result of that is the park now became theirs again. And when before folks would pull their shades at night because they didn't want to see what was going on in the park, now they took ownership. And if they saw something happening that they didn't like, they went out and took control of it or called the police, whereas years before they wouldn't. So by engaging and having volunteers come out, that was a really important part for them to take ownership of that park again. We ended up doing a mural. I think there were over 100 people that came out to help paint the mural you can see in this picture. Again, just to give them some ownership. From the very beginning, once we hired our neighborhood manager, we reached out to the local police department. They were very excited to be part of this because in the past there was this perception that the police didn't care about the people and the people believed that the police didn't want anything to do with them. And in fact, that wasn't the case at all, except no one ever communicated that. So by getting everyone in the same room, we had the chief of police give his personal cell phone out to the folks and say, I'm serious, let us know when you have a problem. So all of a sudden now that whole mindset about, how do we fight crime, before they wouldn't even call the police, now they were encouraged to. We want to know what's happening. There's nothing too trivial. If you see something that doesn't look good, give us a call. So we had the support of Borough Council, we had the support of the local police department, and the codes office. So if there were code violations, residents in the neighborhood were encouraged to call, and they would and respond. So a lot of the things that we did really didn't cost a lot. It was just engaging the folks. We started a crime watch program. One of the things that we're currently in the middle of, and so up to this point we haven't really spent a whole lot of money except for the rehab program. And then just recently we purchased, at sheriff's sale, we purchased some properties and we applied for some federal funding through the state to tear down the first 5 abandoned or substandard houses as you enter the neighborhood. So these homes have been demolished. We again applied for some grant funds here. You can see FHLB is back in the picture, and we built 4 new homes. And these homes are very energy efficient. The heating costs in Northeast Pennsylvania for these homes is estimated to be under $300 a year. It's going to cost more to heat your hot water than it's going to cost to heat the home. So when you're targeting low and moderate income families with limited disposable income, that's a pretty big savings, and it's been very valuable to them. Really nice homes. Here's one that we staged for an open house. It has a loft. They're 1,500 square feet. These are for sale to first-time home buyers. They're appraised at $153,000, and we're selling them for $100 to try and promote ownership in that neighborhood. Just a few more pictures. Here you can see in construction some of the things that we did. High efficiency or a lot of insulation. It's a really tight envelope. So to date, these are some of the things that we've done since between that planning stage, and we're still implementing. We still have a long way to go. You can see some of the statistics. We've demolished 9 blighted properties. The next big thing that we have going on is we've applied to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency for tax credits to do a 24-unit single-family detached rental project. And we're going to be removing substandard rental units within the neighborhood and building new high-efficiency units that'll convert to home ownership after year 15. Another big event that's happening is this new elementary school being built in the neighborhood. We'd like to take credit for it, to say that, they came because we cleaned up the neighborhood, and hopefully there was a little bit of truth to that, but primarily there was a big site, an old abandoned factory. But this is really big now that we're starting to develop housing for families that can be within walking distance of school. It's going to save the school, over $100,000 a year in busing cost. These again are just some of the partners, and I'll say this was probably one of the most important things that we learned is to reach out and engage your local lenders, your foundations, and get them engaged. You heard that earlier, and it hasn't been more true for us. Okay, thanks.
lower this. Not quite as tall, but I'll try. Good thing I'm loud. Good morning. Oh, okay, thank you. My name is Raphael Kaysen. I am the community building specialist with an organization called the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. We are the statewide association of CDCs, nonprofit builders, and community development groups. Next few slides, you'll see a little bit about us. We are one part trade organization, one part policy and advocacy organization, and one part educational organization. That's kind of how I like to sum it up if I had to in a nutshell. My role at the network is multifaceted, as you can, as a small staff. We have max out about 10 people. I run about 2/3 of what are called the regional advocacy teams, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I also head up our vacant and abandoned property policy work. So this was something that I found actually just preparing this presentation that kind of spoke to me. And for the reggae fans in the room, you'll recognize the name at the bottom. Emphasis is mine. It says, collectively, we activists are essential to advancing U.S. policy to help empower marginalized people to lift themselves and their communities out of poverty for good. So 2 words here kind of stuck out to me, collectively, and also activist. So there's a big debate, and folks here will probably be familiar with this, and this comes up at our national conferences all the time, over what is community development. Are we a movement or are we an industry, right? How many folks here have encountered that tension? So as the local guy at my organization, I like to say I bypass that entire conversation. Because at the heart, no matter what we are, we're activists. It doesn't matter if you've been in the community development sector your entire life, or if you've been doing mortgage lending your entire life and now you're transitioning in. You're an activist. You've been motivated by a passion, and that's what we all are. Now, the thing about activists are, we have a really, really hard time of doing stuff on our own. It's really hard to get anything done on your own as an activist. It's almost always done as a group, right? Even the great leaders, the Martin Luther Kings, the Mahatma Gandhis, had a following, had a group behind them. So the other point here is collectively, and that's kind of how we operate as an organization. So who we are, we're a statewide association of over 250, this is from our website, by the way, association of over 250 nonprofit housing and community development corporations, individuals, professional organizations, and prominent New Jersey corporations that support the creation of housing choices and economic opportunities for low and moderate income community residents. Say that 5 times fast. Our mission: the network and its members share a commitment to promoting economic justice and the empowerment of low-income individuals and communities, and encouraging wider participation in the framing and implementation of public policies. We support our CDC members by providing targeted technical assistance and educational programs, pursuing additional resources and improve public policies, and conducting research on ways to enhance the impact and effectiveness of the community development sector. A little long-winded, but I think it makes the point. So how do we get started? So I heard a couple of dates thrown out here. Actually, we have a number of, full disclosure, we have several members here. Paul and Bridget are both members, as is Pilar. 2 of them are actually current board members, to be totally full disclosure, so I'm under the gun here. The dates of founding of both those organizations obviously predate ours. So how did we get started? Well, in 1987, a handful of community developers began meeting at a local diner to discuss the need for a statewide organization. So basically at this point, and folks here I'm sure can relate, everyone was kind of doing their own thing, right? Everyone was doing things individually, and that collective aspect wasn't quite there. So that was the need, and that was identified. 1989 it became formalized, and we were then called the Nonprofit Affordable Housing Network, and we had 34 members at the time. In 1992, we launched a technical assistance and training center, and this was to, again, be an additional resource to our members. And in 1999, and we're going to talk about this more in detail in a moment, we had a proposal for $20 million in state tax credits for affordable homes and neighborhood revitalization, and that became called the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit Program. So 2000, we became the Housing Community Development Network of New Jersey, and this was reflecting the broader vision and diverse membership. A year later, we moved to our current location, which is 145 West Hanover Street in Trenton, and not coincidentally, this is 1 block away from the New Jersey State House. So how do we support our members? Well, there's, again, three main tranches that we'd like to talk about. There's your policy and advocacy, and this is done through our statewide advocacy team infrastructure. We have our state policy priorities. And needless to say, we are in an ongoing collaboration, I should say, or communication with Office of Legislative Services, with various legislators, and at any given point you will see updated state policy priorities right on our website. And we will say, you know, how they made it through committee. We're always tracking this various pieces of legislation. We have our annual legislative day, and that's a photo from a couple of years back. It's hard to see in the photo, but the woman in the middle is carrying a bag of flip-flops. At the time, our campaign was around Superstorm Sandy, and we had something called the Sandy Bill of Rights that we were pushing, and the message was, don't flip-flop on Sandy. So we were delivering signed flip-flops. In this case, we were right outside the Senate Minority Office, the Republican Minority Office. Targeted publications, which I will talk about. Then technical assistance training and education. So obviously there are trainings that we offer, both to our members but also non-members. We have targeted technical assistance, which I will talk about, our annual conference, and educational partnerships. And lastly, we have national networks and partnerships as well. So our advocacy team infrastructure. This is something I think fairly unique to our organization. I've not encountered a lot of other organizations that have something similar. So we have 11 advocacy teams, also called A-teams for short, and they're located throughout New Jersey. Some are countywide, some are citywide. This is going to depend on the needs. So as an example, I live in Union County. It's primarily suburban county. We do have one urban center, Elizabeth, but this advocacy team tends to focus on countywide needs. On the other hand, there's the Camden Community Development Association, where a lot of our members are based, and such a large city, it focuses on the needs in that city. We're made up of organizational members, local activists, and also government administrators. And this is something that I kind of want to emphasize. A lot of times, I think these days, in this era of lack of funding and so on, we think we just need to kind of fight, you know, for every nickel and dime. We found that more often than not, your local officials are very interested in partnering with you and attending meetings. Not always your elected officials, because they have to be viewed as, you know, not in the pocket of special interests, but your head of your local economic development group, heads of local housing authorities. We find them oftentimes are regular attendees at our meetings. And this is a very key thing, because they're your link to the policy realm. So leverage those relationships. So the teams address housing and community development issues, and they also act as liaisons for state-level policy. It's kind of a two-way street, the way these A-teams operate. On the one hand, it helps us get a better sense of what's happening on the local level, so we can then advocate more effectively in the state level. But we also try, whenever possible, to work on local projects in the traditional, perhaps, community organizing sense. So the photo you'll see on your right is actually a meeting that we pulled together in the city of Paterson. We helped run a training that later became a report a couple of years back on something called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, CPTED. So think, kind of comes from Jane Jacobs' Eyes on the Street, Defensible Space. It comes from that whole planning philosophy. I like to call it a literal broken windows approach to community planning. And you know, when the final report came out, the city wanted to then engage on a ward basis for implementation with local residents. But at the time, they didn't really have the capacity. So we helped organize using our local networks to bring folks to the table, working in partnership with the city, and forming an initial fourth ward team. Since then, the city has actually just taken up the mantle and has really run with it and have a system in place. So this is the sort of thing that we'll sometimes engage in, you know, if there's an opportunity and there's expertise to kind of keep things moving at the local level, and you maintain your presence that way. Our annual legislative day, which we held just last week, this is at the New Jersey State House, and this functions also on a number of levels. So it's an opportunity for our members to advocate directly in front of their legislators. We had, I think, 51 legislative visits last week, which is a record for us, and over 200 people attended the day. Whenever possible, we ask our members if they have a relationship that they want to set up a meeting. We just maintain that communication. More often than not, we're making the meetings because we have those relationships as well. This becomes a culmination or a kickoff for an annual campaign. So I mentioned the Sandy campaign. It was a culmination of that a couple of years back. In this case, we actually launched our new slogan called Build a Thriving New Jersey. Thank you. It builds morale, and obviously it's also a show of strength. So, as you can see on the right, when you show up with 200 people, your elected officials show up. They show up, and they talk, and it's one way to have a dialogue. Targeted publications. So we will occasionally, publish, but these are not the kind of reports that you get, in your inbox, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting, I'm gonna get to it later, and then you flag it, and you never look at it again. These are specific, simple, straightforward reports that are designed to advocate for our members. So on the left, you'll see the Stronger Together report. This documented the economic impact of 25 years of the development work of our members. And we held one big event. This was released at our 25th anniversary. And we've now been releasing county-wide versions of these reports and inviting local officials to attend and local press. And it's a way to advocate, on many levels, using that kind of data. On the right, you'll see something that was called Developing Effective Municipal Housing Plans. For those familiar with New Jersey, we're currently involved in a whole slew of litigation around our statewide inclusionary housing program protocol called Mount Laurel. This was our effort in reaching out directly to municipalities in how you create an effective plan. And within this report, we showcased the work of our members to kind of deal with the pushback that we were inevitably seeing. Affordable housing, we can't have this. Well, this is an example of how to do it and how to do it well. And so we worked on multiple levels. On a policy level, we were promoting something that was positive, but also on an organizational level, it was very helpful. So some things to keep in mind when you're developing trainings. Build on the expertise of your staff, obviously. I have a planning background, and as well as real estate. Abandoned property is my thing. That's what I train on. Our VP is an expert in nonprofit management. You better believe we're leveraging that in the work that she does. Also, leverage your existing relationships, and this is both promotional and professional. So obviously, you want to promote your trainings within your networks, but if you have someone, such as Pilar, who is an expert in what they do, they can also be an asset to you, and very often they will come and train. Curriculum should reflect the needs of members, but don't be afraid to innovate. So we had, this past year, just sort of a learning curve as well, so everyone's still learning. We sent out a notice asking what you want to be trained on. And what it came back to us was, well, we want development, we want finance. Well, we organized a development training and actually had to fight tooth and nail to get people to register because of time commitment issues and so on. So yes, you want to plan around what your members' needs are, but also don't be afraid to innovate and kind of maybe take a risk. On the right, you'll see a training we held on community land trusts. There's only one active community land trust in New Jersey at this time, though I think there's one in Camden as well, possibly. But as something that was timely, we decided to hold it, and while we had maybe 10 people, of those 10 people, we had 3 directors of economic development and 1 mayor. So sometimes it's quality, not quantity, that you're looking at. And don't be afraid to partner strategically. In our case, for trainings, we are right next to the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority, and they offer trainings all the time. We entered into a cross-promotional partnership with them, costs us no money, great way to give our members access to the trainings they need. Technical assistance. So people hear about ABC, always be closing. Okay? This is always be advocating. So whenever you're doing technical assistance and training, it should really be an extension, obviously, of your advocacy work. So examples of what we do. For our members, we have strategic planning, board training, and also in this day and age, loss of funding, crisis transitioning. And for our non-members, it's an extension of our policy work. So in our case, our neighborhood revitalization work, our abandoned property work, and this also works. It helps the municipality, but also gives opportunities for our members to partner with them as well. I don't know if I have time to talk about this, do I? Okay. So a couple of folks, panelists mentioned the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit Program. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that this is actually the secret weapon in many cases to the projects that they did. So the NRTC program, it started in 2002, and it was designed to foster the revitalization of distressed neighborhoods, but through leveraging private investment. Essentially, businesses invest money, and we helped design this, so that's why I'm talking about it. Businesses invest money, and they get a 100% tax credit against their New Jersey state tax obligation. The funds invested are used by community-based nonprofits, and they're projects that are part of a neighborhood plan. I know Bridget mentioned the neighborhood plan in Camden. East Camden has had one. It's part of the process. You have to have a neighborhood planning process to get approved. There's only $10 million in tax credits annually, and this has been a challenge. Now, normally, right, the issue is always lack of funding, lack of funding, lack of funding. This is probably the one example that I can point to. I said the problem is not lack of funding. There's tons of funding. The problem is we have a limit at how much funding we allow. So we've been advocating for many years now to increase the cap, and that will be a continued effort, probably until the next gubernatorial administration is my guess. So the goals: encouraging community-based neighborhood planning, provide flexible resources, attract private investment, and foster ongoing partnerships between private corporations and community-based development organizations. This just kind of shows the eligible uses. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here. It's a 60-40 split in terms of the use of the funds between housing and economic development and non-bricks and mortar. But you can see from the list that it's pretty flexible. There's a lot of sort of leeway you have within your planning work and how to use the funds. So what are some accomplishments? And I apologize, these stats are actually a little dated. It's from 2014. As of the end of 2014, there were 29 approved neighborhood plans throughout the state. We had $78 million in contributed funds and 96 funded projects. 56 at the time were still active at around $45 million, and 40 were actually completed, just under $33 million. So lastly, I want to talk about just national networks. Obviously, this is something that you need to be, that's also useful. We have 3 national partners, NACEDA, the National Alliance of Community Economic Development Associations, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and the Center for Community Progress. And these national organizations also serve various strategic purposes. They all have specialties, and we interact with them in various ways. Thank you.
So is this working? So you've heard from 2 practitioners and 1 more of an association of community development organizations. And I think we heard a lot about collaboration, partnerships, collective relationships, and those are all obviously very important in the work that we do. So I'd like to ask a few questions, then I'll open it up to the audience. I think one of the major problems that I've seen in a lot of community development is how to keep the residents engaged. And could you, all 3, maybe share how either you did it or in Raphael's case, how a group that how they did it. So.
Does this work? I think you're right. I think, and Rich sort of talked about it too, I think it's the hardest thing that, as part of what we're doing. For us, it ended up being, we initially tried by sort of having steering committees and all of these set meetings, and we'll update you every month. That's not what people are interested in. And what we found was that we really had to do things out in the community where we went to them as opposed to them always coming into separate meetings with us. So for us, it became an issue of partnering with as many other organizations that we could. After school programs where we could talk to the kids, going out and going to ESL classes to be able to meet people that way. And then having small events. And so events sort of like you were saying, not where you spend a whole lot of money, but where you're being actually seen outside. So whether it's a cleanup of a yard or a street, having like a decorate your house for Christmas contest sort of thing. And it allowed us, by getting people engaged, it allowed us to then also say, hey, while you're here, we could talk about that street corner or whatever it was that was going on. And we've also really attempted to leverage some social media. It's not one of my fortes, but I have other people in the office who are doing it. And so we're starting to get much more active, like on Facebook and things like that, to be able to reach out to people that way and actually ask questions and get answers back that way, so that it doesn't even entail sort of coming out to a meeting, but when they think of something, sort of preparing, bringing it up right when they're thinking about it, as opposed to, I'll write it down and put it on the kitchen, and I'll remember to bring it, from the refrigerator, which isn't always the first thing that you remember to do.
Food. Yeah, try and keep it light and fun, and try and limit the meetings. Try and keep them short. Don't let someone take over the meeting, and so keep your meeting short, concise. Focus on the issue that's at hand, and plan those fun events. Keep people engaged, and Facebook. I don't do it, but my staff does, and that's been really beneficial.
Well, I wouldn't want to speak to necessarily what our members do specifically, but I think at our level, the A-team structure really does a lot. Some of our teams meet monthly, some bi-monthly. I think the key there is to kind of gauge, your audience and gauge the interest. We have one team that just meets quarterly and doesn't actually engage in direct advocacy, but we center it around speakers coming in, around tours of projects, and that's a way to kind of start still to build capacity, even if the group is not yet ready to sort of engage in direct advocacy work. So that's how we do it.
I wondered if each of you could share about funding a little bit more. I heard Wells Fargo, and so that's certainly a wonderful. Wells Fargo Foundation has available both planning grants that you can apply for, and then implementation grants after that. So, but are there other sources that you put together for operating community development work?
I'd say it's any and all. So the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, in terms of the planning and implementation, makes just an unbelievable difference. But there's still the other work that you have to do. And so for us, it has been the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit. But we also, the state of New Jersey has some other infill programs that we're able to use. And I know we're in Delaware, so that doesn't really help you. But we do have some state programs that have helped. The Federal Home Loan Bank, Rich, you talked about FHLB stuff. We've been able to leverage some of that. City home or county home and CDBG funds we've been able to tap into. And then just a huge assortment of every single foundation you can possibly sort of talk to, or corporations. We have, just sort of been successful in trying to go out and talk about your neighborhood, our neighborhood, and as we've gotten people sort of engaged, and I think Paul talked earlier about sort of having a local corporation that then invited others in. That has also, so I think once you can sort of get into, we have Campbell Soup Company in Camden, and they're a huge proponent of sort of leveraging work in the city. And so if you have someone, big or small, even just local branches of banks, sometimes have been able to offer, whether it's just a location to do something or be able to then talk to other groups that they know. I think we've been able to leverage some of that.
Yeah, I would agree. Wherever you can find it, check with your state. We have various home programs that we use. When it comes to some small events, we ask for sponsors or local businesses, and we also ask our residents to, we challenge them to say, we have a bank that'll match what you guys could do, for park improvements. And so we don't raise a lot of money, but again, it gets the buy-in from the local folks.
It's all about relationships. So just as an example, because of our membership with NACITA, our national partner, we're actually able to offer our members a very, very deeply discounted memberships to Grant Station. Grant Station, I think, normally costs something like $3,000 a year. It's something very, very high, and we can offer it for $600. So that relationship allows us to kind of, as a pass-through, to offer that discount to our members. And just to piggyback to what Pilar and Rich said, absolutely. I mean, we find funders for events, for reports, like the Stronger Together report, A lot of our funders are foundations, but also, Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, banks, who are very interested in funding this work because they're funding the developers. So it works to their benefit as well from a promotional standpoint.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll just share one other thing. For all the nonprofits, if you don't know about TechSoup for software, that's a wonderful resource. So what has your biggest challenge or barrier been in your community?
We have a bunch. And I think for us, some of it is sort of that perception versus reality, and it's why we've jumped into this branding thought. We have crime issues, we have education issues, we have unemployment issues, and so we sort of have the whole thing. And I always say I don't want to talk about that when I'm talking about Camden when I'm not in Camden. But the reality of is that's what you think of when you hear someone talk about Camden in New Jersey. And so for us, the city has been engaged in attempting to work on some of the education issues and some of the crime issues, and we are seeing an improvement in the number of police. And the other day I had two sort of what I would think of as beat cops walking down the street. I've never seen that before in my entire life, two guys walking down in full uniforms. And so for us, it became sort of this discussion that as we looked in our survey of our neighborhoods, 75% of the people living in our neighborhoods said they were either satisfied, somewhat satisfied, or very satisfied. And that to me means with 75%, they're not living in my neighborhood because they have to, because there's no other option. They're actually choosing to live here. And is it because they're close to other people? Is it because it's not because it's the only place I can afford and I'm stuck here. It's actually like, hey, this is a community of choice and I'm living here. And so we wanted to sort of move that perception so that you didn't have to have that view in your mind of what most people think of as Camden. And that's, I think, for us, there is sort of that things are improving, things are changing, and we have to get that word out. And so that, for us, is a really hard barrier to be able to make that change. And that's what we're hoping with this, to try something different with this marketing and branding.
I think for us, it's just keeping the momentum, keeping folks engaged. It's so difficult. We don't have any one program that continues other than just like Crime Watch or something like that. But we don't have like a rental assistance program like you heard earlier. So we're constantly looking for a new program, a new project. And it's really easy to lose momentum. If you don't have something on the go all the time, the residents really believe you're not doing anything. And so that's, I think, by far our biggest challenge.
Raphael, do you have anything to share?
Our governor doesn't show up to events like this.
Where have you not been successful? And what were the strategies used or, lessons learned from that?
Well, I mentioned earlier, it took a couple years for us to get our momentum back. And the biggest challenge is with your local elected officials, keeping them up to date and keeping them, because they're always changing. And in a small community like ours, there's always the little political connections. So you have to be very careful, who you talk to about what, and make sure that you keep the elected officials engaged and make sure they believe that they're part of the solution and give them some buy-in. That's been our big challenge.
And I think for us it's been communication. Sort of, that constant work to keep people engaged, but then going back for sort of the feedback. That's the scary part, is when you actually have to then go back to the community and say, this worked, this didn't work. And so having that sort of constant, while we're constantly sort of trying to engage folks, we also want to make sure it's sort of a two-way street in terms of communication. And I think that's what we still are having a really rough time with. Yep.
And one other thing that is just evaluating yourself, and it is very difficult. When you're done at the end of the day, it's easy to put your tools away and think the day's over, but you really need to step back and see, you know, was it really worth what we just did? And that's something that oftentimes gets forgotten.
It's sort of like what the lessons learned were, that kind of thing. How about, does the audience have any questions for the panel?
A question for Pilar on the transit-oriented development. Can you talk a little bit more about what your goals are for that? Are you looking at commercial real estate, mixed income, mixed use, affordable housing, all the above?
So I think for the neighborhood in general, it's sort of an all of the above. So we are engaged in sort of the housing, both market and affordable end of it. We're trying to work with our local residents and retail. For us, the main issue on it, we have a great commercial corridor, but most of the landlords are not the actual retail, the person who actually owns the business. So there's a real disconnect between how well the business is doing and how good the building looks. And so that's one of the things that we're working on there. But we're also attempting to lure in an additional station. And that right now we're still sort of in that advocacy stage. So we have one, but it is nowhere, it's sort of, it's where it was convenient to be built. So it's on the train line, back down underneath the bridge, and you have to sort of wind your way down there. It's no place that you're going to want to go at night or by yourself. And there's another stop or a location that we have identified that would be right off of our commercial downtown area, where we think we could put in some light industrial that the city's working on, as well as maybe convert some of the buildings into housing and continue the retail down. So we're really still in that sort of beginning advocacy stage, but that's what we'd really like to see to happen. And I'm sure it's 5 or 10 years away, but they're at least willing to talk to us, which I think is the first great step.
I have a question on the targeting of the publications at the county-wide and then the municipality-wide by Mr. Casson. How much work do you do in advance in strategizing that targeting? And over the years, as far as developing relationships with print and broadcast media and then your integration of social media, and I'm interested in hearing about your rollout of your targeted publications.
Sure, it's a good question. So in the case of the Stronger Together report, that was all our research, our inputs. We basically made a ton of phone calls to all of our members trying to find out about the project cost, and that was the economic input. We then partnered with a research organization out of Philly called eConsult to actually produce the report, and we had folks working on graphics and so on. As far as the existing relationship, that's a really good question. I want to say that on the local level, it's kind of still in development. So, or in development through the ebb and flow of our organization. But with regard to the municipal housing plan book, we made sure to have hard copies available. We used our advocacy teams to disseminate that. Just as an example, up in Union County, the chair of the team is the former head of the local housing authority. So he has a lot of local contacts, and he was getting copies to every councilman, the mayor, the town manager, everyone, because in many cases they just didn't understand. It's very complicated. Their opinion is, the lawyers will handle this, and so we viewed it as our job to educate them. So it was a combination of all of that.
I've heard this touched on, but I'm wondering if there's an increasing consciousness about the importance of the environmental health of the communities, the natural capital of the communities, and a sense of stewardship.
Sure, we have a really large park in the center of our neighborhood. And one of the things that we heard in our survey right from the beginning was we need more parks. And when we went back to them, we said, it's actually, we have plenty of parks. Let's get down to what the issue is. We need parks that we can actually use and that people will take care of. And so we have seen an increase, and it's actually been really coming out of our youth in the neighborhood in terms of some rain gardens that we've done, rain barrels, that capture sort of stormwater, and care of the park, not only in terms of sort of the natural resources, but also just what does the amphitheater look like? What do the tennis courts look like? Are we keeping things up so that it's actually a place where you can be healthy and come back to? So we're also working with the YMCA, who it's not a drop-off program, so it's not a daycare program, but it's someone in the park who has eyes on the kids that are there, even though it's, you can wander up, and if you're a parent with them, you should be there. But hey, let's talk about soccer. I'll teach you a couple skills, or hula hoops, or whatever the sort of the deal is, the sport of the day is. And we've actually started working on sort of the development side of it, also in terms of some solar panels on some houses and different other sort of energy efficiency ways that we can sort of do some retrofits to some of the houses that we have in our neighborhood.
Richard, this question is for you. As a nonprofit developer, typically we are always the first ones to go into neighborhoods to create markets. And you mentioned that you had a project where the property's appraised for $150,000. You sold it for $100,000. Can you talk about what the beginning existing conditions were and what your construction cost looks like, so we can evaluate what the total gap on that project is?
Yeah, obviously they cost a lot more money. We're probably at $300,000 per home is what we had into the project. And the way we justify that is that the impact isn't so much the housing itself, it's the more holistic approach of removing the blight, removing those substandard houses, and putting something in where we have responsible homeowners and high efficiency homes that are affordable, easy to maintain. So one of the things that I heard at a session at one of the Wells Fargo conferences is that if you have the right project, there's you really need to throw everything you have at it. And this was one of those projects that we determined. This was the worst block, the 300 block. When you first come into the neighborhood, we would have put $500,000 into these homes if we had to make it work. So it's one that was very visible and almost catalytic for us. Down the road, obviously, we're not going to be able to do that all the time, but our homes going forward are going to be somewhere in the $150,000 range to construct.
Hi, thanks. Everyone has touched on the importance and the power of collaboration here, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your state housing finance agencies and other state departments and the programs other than the neighborhood revitalization and housing tax credit programs that you found to be particularly useful in your work, and perhaps they might have application here as well. Thanks.
Sure. So the neighborhood revitalization tax credit, what's so fantastic about that, it's up to almost $1 million a year, $985,000 per group per year. So you can have one per year, and then there's rules. You can't have more than two, things like that. And it's as Raphael was saying, it's 60% has to be spent on housing or economic development, and the other 40 can be used for a little sort of more loosey-goosey type stuff. In addition to that, the state of New Jersey has a couple, so we also have sort of some of the county or city, federal pass-through programs, home or CDBG type of things. But the state of New Jersey has two separate programs that I can think of that are set just for sort of home ownership type housing, although balanced housing can also be used for rental. So we have both a balanced housing, which came out of some of the sort of push to have each fair share housing of in each of the municipalities. And it comes off of a transfer tax when someone sells a home. And since we haven't been selling a lot of homes lately, that has really depleted the balanced housing. Hopefully, as things start to sort of rebound, maybe that will come back in. And that has been one of the deepest pockets, sources for New Jersey for affordable housing. And the houses that are built with balanced housing funds have restrictions that are based for 80% or lower AMI, and they are in perpetuity. So it's, in my view, a very hard product to use in a place like Hamden, where we're pushing to have the market change, and I want my homeowners to be able to reap the benefit of taking the risk of buying that house in the first place. So I would advocate that that's actually a great thing to use in some place like Hoboken, where we want to make sure that we are maintaining that affordable house. In a place like Hamden, I advocate using our Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency has come up with a product. It's CHOICE. It stands for something. I can't tell you all the acronyms. But it is based on an emerging market background. And so we get up to a certain amount of subsidy that sits on top of construction loans that are permanent subsidy that the homeowner then takes on when they purchase the home. And it is a shared equity. So they never like to make anything very easy, so it's not sort of this set 10 or 15 year, it's this 5 to 15 years. But it's based on a 15-year payout then. In the first couple years, you get absolutely nothing. So if you sell that house, they get the entire 100% of any sales proceeds. But then it begins to step down the longer you stay in the house. But there are no income restrictions on the house, so anyone can purchase that home. So if someone wants to be a pioneer and come in, who's making $1 million, can buy this house, they can do that. We're not seeing that in Camden. For the most part, it's my same regular buyers, but they're able to take advantage of having that equity in the house immediately after that first few years burns off, and then it's their house to be able to sell. So that's the program that I sort of prefer myself for us to use in Camden. Do you know other?
Sure. I mean, we do work closely with HMFA, the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, which are our state bank, if you will, on their programs. I mean, we did help them as they were reworking their mortgage buy-down program, foreclosure prevention fund. We worked them closely, and up until the re-release of it in November of last year. It's a $50,000 buy-down for folks who are either in foreclosure or facing foreclosure. I should also say one of our big state partners is the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey, dealing with supportive housing for people with disabilities, people formerly homeless, another statewide advocacy organization. We work closely with them, and they work also with HMFA on things like the Supportive Housing Connection voucher, which is a voucher designed for folks who are coming out of institutions into the community. So we'll work, if we don't have an expertise in something, we'll work with our partners that way as well.